Welcome, everyone. I hope you're enjoying all of the sessions today, and I can't believe it's day 3, and I think it's gone super fast, but I've been enjoying everything I've been watching today. We encourage you to share your TMC experience via your social channels and use the conferencing hashtag. So my name is Kathleen Packer. I'm a director with TEFMA. And it's my pleasure today to introduce John for presenting the journey to net zero. We had a quick chat before, and it's a very, very important topic, and it's very current. I know my university is currently grappling with what we're going to do, so I'm actually quite excited about this talk, and hopefully I can learn some things that I can take back to my my day job. John leads Turner & Townsend's advisory services in Australia and New Zealand, having transferred here from the UK in 2013. John specialises in improving how capital programs and projects are delivered and the impact they can make for our clients. John works across all sectors, including education, health, retail, commercial, rail, pharmaceuticals, high tech, and brings cross-sector experience to his projects by learning from best practice. John is passionate about how asset planning, design, and construction can support the global net zero challenge, and is working with clients to integrate a net zero approach into capital program delivery. This is achieved through great governance, passion, leadership, and clear data and reporting. We welcome John, and we'd also like to thank Turner & Townsend for being our major sponsor for this event, which has been fantastic this year. So I'm going to turn over to John now.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Kathleen, for the wonderful introduction. We're very proud of our work in the university and tertiary education sector, and obviously incredibly proud to be one of the sponsors here on your conference. I know you're coming towards the end of it, and I hope you've had an educational and insightful few days. Certainly, the platform I think has worked really well, and it just shows what you can do in a virtual space, reducing our footprint in travel, and that leads us on nicely to what I'm going to talk about today, which is really around net zero. And I suppose I want to share with you some thoughts, frameworks, point you in the direction of some other areas of information to just really start you thinking about, which I'm sure you are to varying degrees, net zero and how you get there. I think I'm very conscious on this call that there's going to be a real mixture of organisations that have really embarked hard on this journey and are making some great insights and great carbon reductions, and some people perhaps thinking about that journey. So definitely do not have all the answers today, but really keen to just sort of perhaps provoke some thought. Hopefully you finish this sort of 20-25 minutes with some ideas of some other things that you can do. And I think the most important thing about net zero for me is the sector working together to transform what we do. So I hope you find the next 20 minutes or so really useful. Let me just make sure this is working. So just going to give a bit of background and context, talk about the challenges of implementation. And then I really just want to spend a bit of time talking about how you approach net zero, thinking about it from a program, portfolio and project perspective. And those 3 levels really do need to be thought about. Individual little projects are great and they're a good start, but you really need to think about this in a sort of programmatic way, driven by a really clear strategy coming down from leadership. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. touch on some of the potential solutions. What does that actually mean? And you do need to get down into the detail eventually around net zero. It cannot just stay up at a hypothetical level. At some point, you've just got to get on with it. There's a great course that I've completed recently with the University of West England. Actually, they did a 5-week free, I think it's called a MOOC, multiple, I can't remember what that stands for, but basically free, and lots of people can do it. And the chap there said, if you're targeting net zero on some of your buildings, carbon buildings, and you're targeting it and you don't quite get there, don't beat yourself up about it. You should challenge yourselves on the next projects and learn and move on, but just go for it now and start thinking about net zero and carbon buildings and carbon assets as quickly as you can. Bit of a summary, and we will leave some time, looking at my track, little timer there, 23 minutes. We'll leave some 5 minutes for Q&A at the end. And I probably should say, I definitely do not have all the answers. So happy to take some real nasty questions, but yeah, I definitely might have all the answers, which is why I'm really learning about this area of net zero. We are in a climate emergency. The IPCC report that comes out is showing that we are not really tracking against the carbon reduction emissions that we need to avoid the 1.5 or 2 degree increases. But there is no magic bullet to this. It is going to be lots of different solutions, all impacting upon reducing our emissions. You can see there on the right-hand side from 2016. And again, I wanted to point you in the direction of a few things. I'm conscious, actually, I think I was just asking the people, I think you can click to get full screen if you need to see some of these slides, but we will include these slides, I think, for you to have a look at afterwards. But there's a great source called Our World in Data, which has some fantastic information on where GHG greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. And you can see energy is the big one in industry, transport, and in the buildings that we use. So obviously, universities, big users of energy. And we've got to do something about it. There was a great quote. I completed a University of Cambridge course during lockdown, actually. I thought I wanted to learn a bit more. A net zero future is inevitable. We're heading in that direction. The difference is whether we are still around to be part of it. Mother Nature, through the climate events and weather events that we're seeing now, will start to reduce carbon emissions in the atmosphere, in the environment. We've got to get in front of that. We've got to take a leading step in reducing that carbon footprint and get down to a net zero future that we are all part of. And I think that is quite exciting. You can look at it in two ways. It was quite pessimistic to hear that, in terms of a net zero future being inevitable. But there's a great phrase that's used in the sort of net zero world, which is conditional optimism. If we do the things that we need to do and the solutions are out there to do it, we can get there. But it only works if we're working in partnership with lots of different people, lots of different stakeholders, that we have leadership and government really aligned, that policies support what we're doing. But we can get there. And I definitely put myself in the conditional optimist bucket now. I think it's a really good phrase. The science is there, the science is proven. I think 99% of scientists now believe that the climate change and the climate increase that we're seeing at the moment is from the activities of us and humans in these sort of areas. So we just got to kind of get on with it and take that programmatic approach, which I'm going to talk about a little bit as we go through. Again, I love some of these graphs. So our world in data, you can see there that from 1860 on the left-hand side, the CO2 emissions have been flying up across Australia and New Zealand, and then from 2000 onwards, we start to see that dip, which is great to see. On the right-hand side there, from 2010 to 2019, again you can see that minus 12-ish% for Australia in terms of CO2 emissions. Interestingly, dug around and with some help from colleagues and looked at some of the TEFMA figures. Since 2010, the carbon emissions per full-time student have actually reduced 22% across the university sort of returns that we're seeing there. So actually ahead of that Australian sort of trend in going down. So that's fantastic to see. And that shows that universities are getting on the front foot, thinking about how they can reduce their CO2 emissions through different burning of different use of renewable fuels and alternative fuels and patterns of use potentially of your campuses. So really great to see that trajectory happening. It should be said that government policy in Australia is lacking behind the rest of the world. There's another great source that I'll point you in the direction of, which is the Climate Action Tracker, which categorizes countries based on their ambition. And Australia is in a group of laggards, which have not really driven forward more ambitious targets in this space. But we've got COP26 coming up very soon. I think I feel a bit sorry for Scott Morrison about having to travel all that way, but I think it's really important. I think COP26 is used as a catalyst event globally to really sort of put some focus on this. So just wanted a bit of background there around the challenge that we face. And also that things are moving in the right direction, and we do have reasons to be optimistic. What I wanted to sort of touch on now is some of the challenges that I think are faced in this sector. I'm not going to speak about in too much detail, but there's some of the challenges that are actually faced by a lot of real estate owners and asset owners. There is a lack of resources. So if you're accelerating forward, there is a lack of supply chain, a lack of scale and cost, scale in the supply chains at the moment to potentially support the pace at which you want to move. Offsetting, Taylor & Townsend, we are committed to being net zero. We became net zero in January 21. A lot of that's through offsetting. We want to be truly carbon neutral by 2025. Offsetting has its place, but it's definitely some challenges there. On the leased asset side of stuff, I know you probably potentially own a lot of your assets, but there may be assets that you own. As a tenant, you need to influence landlords and owners to make sure that those assets that you're spending lots of money on your rent are actually meeting your net zero aspirations. But the big challenge, and I think for a lot of universities and tertiary education, is existing assets. So 80% of the buildings that will be here in 2050 already exist. So how do we bring those existing buildings into a decarbonised future in the most cost-effective way? How do we build new ones in terms of being zero carbon? So existing assets and your asset strategy and asset planning is a really big challenge to get your head around. Net zero assets and the availability, it is a competitive world now. Everyone is going to want to have assets which are low carbon, whether leased or owned. And so the availability of those net assets, if you have a broad geographical footprint, may begin to be limited. And regulations. So reporting regulations at the moment, I think, are going to change. Will be interesting to see the government policies that maybe start to change following COP26 that come out. But there is increasing regulation that I'm sure will impact upon tertiary real estate and the decarbonisation. So some big challenges there to sort of think through. Okay, so one of the things I think really important is to try and put some frameworks in place that really help you start to think about how to address this challenge. And again, I'm pointing you in the direction of the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures. I think this framework, it sounds very complicated, at a simple level is really, really useful. And I think these are the elements that at the top level of your organizations need to be thought through and discussed, and these questions need to be answered. Is there a strategy for net zero? What is the business case behind it, and what are those risks and opportunities? Why are you doing it? If you can't answer why you're doing it, above and beyond it's the right thing to do, there needs to be a financial reason, a business case behind it. There needs to be brand opportunities. Obviously, your students and staff are going to be behind it, but that strategy needs to be really clear, concise, and communicated to all your stakeholders. Governance is really important. Strategy without governance is a really interesting document that everyone reads, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's like having a car and not having any fuel in it. Governance is the structure in which you make your decisions about net zero. Where are you going to invest? What are your priorities? And underpin that with great reporting and information. Risk management is a really interesting part for it. People think about risk management related to net zero, and it's generally around climate related risks. Do we have buildings that are going to burn down, be flooded, and sort of impacted by climate events? Actually, risk management related to climate related risks also includes litigation. There's an increasing exponential curve of litigation cases now that are being brought against organizations that promise net zero and carbon performance, but don't deliver upon them. So expensive lawsuits, brand damage, etc. And then transition, being left behind in the transition to net zero. particularly I think in the university space, where students will start to choose where they go depending on your performance in net zero. And then metrics and targets. What is your baseline? Kathleen and I were talking about this earlier on. Like, what is the baseline performance of your assets at the moment, and how can you measure and track that going forward? Those 4 building blocks, quite simple, and I think really engaging topics for stakeholders. And then underpin that with what are the solutions to then deliver upon those aspirations. What are the projects, the little individual projects that you're going to do that add up to delivering against your strategy? We did a recent poll. 50% of organizations felt their net zero strategy and their capital delivery, so their project approach, were aligned. Just 50%. So 50% of organizations, net zero was over here somewhere, and capital programs and projects were over here. And it's really important to bring those two together to approach that in a consolidated way. I don't have time. Yes, and so that integrated approach from a portfolio perspective, great net zero strategy at the top, driven by your executive, having a portfolio management office which can look for net zero opportunities and assure that you're delivering against that strategy, having a look through your different divisions and faculties and work streams to understand what their capital plans are, what are the assets that they need, what are the assets you've got to refurbish, which are the ones you've got to replace, and how do you put net zero aspirations and objectives into those capital plans. Once you have those capital plans, program management. How do we just drive through those projects with great governance, efficiency, bundling of procurement opportunities and supply chain, lessons learned, and really drive that through a program management layer. And then having great program and project teams, people who are passionate about delivering net zero projects and delivering net zero aspirations within asset replacement projects as per normal. Really important to take this consolidated, integrated approach to net zero delivery. Program management itself, what we want to do on the right-hand side there, we've got our net zero commitments and we want a net zero real estate program. Those program work streams you need to think about, and obviously that will depend on your priorities and your portfolio. Things like your portfolio strategy, new builds, retrofit. Retrofit is coming on leaps and bounds. So Turner & Townsend, we're supporting in the UK, the London Mayor over the last 10 years to retrofit all public sector buildings in London. So that's things like better insulation, windows, solar panels, etc., biomass heat pumps and stuff, and just retrofitting those into these buildings. Looking at your renewables and your energy strategy, looking at your operations and the patterns of use of how you use your buildings, and then offsetting. So some of those are the sort of program work streams that you might then think about in your net zero program. Project management offices and program management offices, sometimes a bit of a dirty word, and we've all seen PMOs that haven't really delivered value, but in this case, putting their arms around net zero and making sure that everything is moving in the right direction, we've seen PMOs have great success, and we're working with a number of clients where the PMO construct is really helping drive the net zero program. But this program management structure of putting your net zero projects into this sort of structure is really key. It helps you deliver on that route map, sets your milestones and targets which you can celebrate and build confidence that you're moving in the right direction, gives you that level of control across the top. Managing stakeholders, this is a really important stakeholder journey as well. Don't underestimate the change management required to get people excited about net zero, to be thinking about their job in a different way. It has got to deliver value for money. I don't think dollars and carbon can be separate anymore. They've got to be together, and you've got to be thinking about how they leverage off each other and actually start to take what we've seen in the past is you have capital budgets and you have operational budgets. And quite often in this space, there's a feeling that it's going to cost you a little bit more on the capital, but you might save on the OPEX. But these people are different budget holders and not too worried about that. We've got to bring that together to have that TOTEX view on the dollars and the whole life cost of an asset. Supply chain development and at a program level, working with your supply chain to understand what they can deliver when, ways of bundling to get that better value for money, but also being able to look for some quick wins. So program management is really the key that we see to delivering great projects in the net zero world. From a project management perspective, once you get down into the detail, there are lots of different opportunities. And I think we'll share these slides afterwards, so I won't go through them in lots of detail, because there are a couple I do want to touch on before we sort of go to questions. But at your concept design, your developed design, your procurement and construction, you have different opportunities to influence net zero performance. Concept design, all about how you're designing the fabric of your property, of your asset, of what you want to actually do. Where is it pointed? Where is the location? How is it going to be used? What's your energy strategy? What's the fabric of the building? And so on. Really where you want to spend most of your time thinking about how you actually deliver a great net zero or carbon neutral building. Getting into the developed design, really testing yourself around value engineering from a sustainability perspective. What we've seen in the past, I suppose, is lots of net zero aspirations in concept. Once you get into developed design, perhaps the money starts to get a bit tight and things start to get cut. It's really, really important that the net zero opportunities don't get cut for other areas of scope and functionality here. So it's really important in developed design that we kind of stick to what we wanted to do. Through procurement, you buy lots of things, and the scope 3, if that means anything to anyone, scope 3 emissions is generally going to be in your supply chain. And I think you can be more demanding with your supply chain around their performance. Where are they sourcing their raw materials from? How are they transporting them to manufacture? How are they manufacturing them and powering that into the material you need to use on your sites? How does that material get to your site? All of those things are things that you can start to demand in your tender documentation, and you can start to evaluate people against carbon, not just perhaps the way we've always evaluated our suppliers. And then in construction, we're doing some really interesting work at the moment thinking about net zero construction. It's a small part of the overall life cycle of a building. Obviously, you've got the embedded carbon in how you build it and the operational carbon of how you run it. But how do you actually construct in the best possible way? Can you use renewable energy on site? And you can, again, start demanding that from your contractors, that they start to demonstrate that they are deploying the most sustainable net zero way of actually building your building physically on site. So hopefully you can see that sort of portfolio level with strategy and people all aligned, program management becoming the control and governance framework, and then down at project level, you've got lots of opportunities to influence delivering net zero. All of those rolling up and down, and great reporting back up to the top there where we had our metrics and governance and so on. There's a couple of minutes left before maybe some questions. I just did want to point you in the direction of a couple of things. I always think these are really useful. This is not something we've produced, and again, credit to Letty in London. So Letty, let me get that right, London Energy Transformation Initiative. I was pointed in this direction. I think this is a really interesting little summary here, and I hope people can see it. If they can't see it, we'll make sure you can get it. But they're talking about embodied carbon, which is the emissions within the materials that you actually sort of build the fabric of your building in. And I think these 6 little mantras, if you like, are ones that, if you take away anything from today, should be thought about. Building less, right? Challenge the brief. Do we actually need to build what we're thinking we're building in the size that we're going to be building it? Building it light, making sure it's flexible, can be replaced easily, and not putting overly complex materials in there. Building it wise, again, knowing where your carbon is, like what are the elements within that building that have the most embodied carbon? Are there alternatives? Exploring things like design for manufacture and assemble, modular type buildings. Build low carbon, specify that you want low carbon, renewable, bio-based materials from responsible sources in your tenders, in your procurement. Understand what the impact there is on cost, obviously the longer term operational cost. Build for the future. It's got to be flexible, building flexible. I mean, COVID's a great example of where I think assets and space will be used differently now when we come back to work in the offices, and build collaboratively. Net zero, I think, is one of those things where it's not so much about competition, it's about collaboratively sharing lots of different things. So I think those 6 things are really interesting. I recommend having a look at this one pager that we'll give you a link to. It talks about where in the life cycle you can really influence embodied carbon. And again, Letty in London got a similar thing for operational carbon. And again, some interesting facts here, looking at some of the TEFMA figures. So since 2010, the energy consumption per meter squared of GFA stayed pretty stable for your returns in terms of the universities, and quite high average consumption of energy. The standards here that they're recommending in London are sort of 65 kilowatts per hour per meter squared per year, compared to 197 that the returns were showing over here. So there's quite a big gap there. So operational carbon really is the one to be thinking about as well. And here there's the sort of 10 key requirements that you can have a look at: low energy use, measuring, reducing your construction impacts, and the low carbon energy supply. So something that I've rushed up, sort of running out of time with to get to some questions, but really wanted to point you in the direction of these two sources of information. I'll jump over there and just jump to the end. It can be very complex and feel a bit unachievable in terms of the net zero program, but the solutions really are out there. The supply chain is ready to work, and everyone wants to see this happen. So I think the most important thing we believe is that leadership of the people and cultural change required is the most important thing. The technical elements are there, the solutions are there, but leading people on that journey is probably the most important. So I have gone a bit over time there. Apologies, Kathleen. I don't know if we have some questions we can squeeze in.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And as you said, it's a very complex issue, but you've really shown some practical way forward for us. And as I said, we're kind of going through the journey, so I'll really take on board. And I think, thank you for sharing that. We do have a question about from Amanda. Basically, with the way we work changing in the post-COVID world, do you think this will have a significant impact, or will be needed to be considered, like in these strategies?
I think it's a great question. I mean, we were talking about this a bit earlier on. One thing about COVID is you sort of like so much attention on COVID while all this climate change is an impact is happening. So I hope it doesn't sort of derail it. But I think the way we're using our assets, the patterns of use, are we all going to be coming into the office to sort of meet up? Are we all going to be just working at home? I completed my University of Cambridge course online. It was great, worked really well. So I think it is going to impact. I think actually it could accelerate some of the opportunities we have, that when we come together in a space, we use that space in a different, more sustainable way. I'm really hopeful that it all sort of aligns quite well. We can take the lessons learned out of COVID and actually apply some of that into addressing some of these climate challenges.
No, I agree. And, making sure we keep up with some of the practices we've kept with in this COVID world. So just a question around, I guess, finances. The university sector is really struggling at the moment, and it's difficult. How would you help us, I guess, influence that? If when we're trying to make some changes, it's not affordable, or.
I think it's another great question. I think one thing we've seen in the UK is lots of funding coming through from government. They really want to push this forward. They see sort of funding. I'm interested in Australia, whether we start to see that coming through now. There are funders out there. We had a great meeting with one the other day. They are looking to invest funds in forward-thinking, leading-edge net zero opportunities as exemplar projects. So if there's anyone out there who sort of has a great idea and they're not quite sure how to fund it, let me know, and I can certainly network you with these people. The fact of the matter is, the business case stacks up, right? You're paying lots of money for coal and gas-fired energy. If you can produce renewable energy on site, it's cheaper, right? There may be some capital investment required, but over time, the payoff seems to be in retrofitting between 5 and 7 years sort of payoff. So from a money perspective, as long as you can figure out the budget, this capital versus OPEX budget, which is always a challenge, I think you can start to approach this from an affordable perspective.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, I think we've got time for one more from William. How would you suggest a small sustainability team, one of mid-level management, drive and prioritize program level development and implementation?
That's a great question. That's $1 million question. Yeah. I've only got 16 seconds left. I think it's about influence. It's about education and awareness. But I think it's just trying to find some of those practical steps and celebrate that success. Even though we're doing some work with Woolworths, I'm sure they won't mind me talking about it. They're going after sort of net zero performance. And when you get down to it, it's things like putting doors on fridges. They're small things, but you do lots of them and they add up to a great win. And I think celebrating those wins, identifying where they can, and then just telling everyone about it starts to build the momentum. We always talk about, I think with sustainability people, we talk about there's the frustrated sustainability people who can't get heard. And it feels like you're pushing the rock up the hill, but you will get there and that rock will go over and everyone will go for it. All the big investment funds now are saying, if we don't build net zero carbon buildings, we go out of business. So it is all happening and the momentum is building. And, that's why I've gone over, because I get so excited about it. But, I suppose it's keep the faith, look for the quick wins, celebrate them loudly, and just try and pull people towards you.
Excellent. Appreciate it. And I think you're right. The momentum is building everywhere. So I want to thank John again and Turner and Townsend. The information will be supplied. So I think someone asked if the information was public. We will definitely supply this. So this session's been taped and can be watched again, and the information will be out there. So thank you so much again, John.
No, it's my pleasure. And, look forward to seeing all the progress made.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.